Number 9. Tanks in Antarctica. Admiral Richard Byrd led an Antarctic research expedition team of 59 men. Their ship transported their equipment to Antarctica and included the only 2 tanks to serve ever on the continent. Developed during the 1930s, one vehicle is an M2A2 light tank. The other is a 1936 T3 light tank. They were too heavy to operate efficiently in the snow, even after crews removed some armor and weaponry. There were ongoing issues with water getting into the fuel tanks, and moisture in the engine's air filters froze. Escalating World War II tensions cut the Byrd expedition short. The Army evacuated 2 bases that they established during the project, and they left the 2 tanks behind. The rusting vehicles are still there today, where they serve as an inconvenient reminder that almost no corner of the globe remains untouched by human activity. Rescuing these vehicles would prove to be an enormous task. Number 8. Douglas C47 Skytrain. While flying from Alaska to Montana in 1950, a C-54 Skymaster military plane vanished, seemingly into thin air over Canada's Yukon Territory. There were 44 people aboard, including 3 civilians, when the aircraft disappeared. Search crews have never found a single sign of the plane or anyone on it, despite extensive efforts to recover it. Search and rescue missions began just an hour after the C-54 went missing, with American and Canadian authorities working together to scour a 350,000 square mile area of the Pacific Northwest. Sadly, the search proved fruitless and led to more destruction. 4 of the 85 planes involved in the search ended up crashing, including a Douglas C-47 Skytrain that encountered bad weather while flying near a mountain in Whitehorse. A downdraft hit it, sending it plunging into the mountainside. All 10 crew members survived and rescue teams saved them, but the plane itself remains at the crash site, where it occasionally gets buried in snow. The only potential clues regarding the missing C-54's whereabouts that were ever uncovered were some unintelligible radio signals and an eyewitness report of a large plane flying overhead in British Columbia, 500 miles south of the Yukon border. To this day, nobody knows what happened. Number 7. USS Annapolis. The fast attack submarine USS Annapolis is the 4th vessel in American history to be named after the United States Naval Academy in Annapolis, Maryland. It entered service in the early 90s and is based out of San Diego, California. Designed to seek and destroy enemy submarines and ships, the 360-foot-long vessel often travels at speeds of over 28 miles per hour. The military had it built to perform various other tasks, including intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance (ISR) missions, supporting battle group operations, and engaging in mine warfare. The Annapolis is a good example of how the U.S. has achieved a prominent role in undersea battle technology through its focus on speed, endurance, mobility, stealth, and payload. There are 3 different classes of submarines that operate under the U.S. Navy's submarine force. As a Los Angeles-class vessel, the Annapolis is part of the fleet that serves as the backbone of the force. During a 2-week training program in 2009 known as the Ice Exercise, the submarine had just emerged from the depths of the Arctic Ocean, breaking through 3 feet of ice to get to the surface. In photos that appeared online, it seemed to many like the Annapolis had perhaps gotten stuck. But manufacturers built it to withstand even the most extreme conditions, and it was just doing one of the many things that they designed it for. Number 6. Arctic radar stations. As Cold War tensions intensified during the 1950s, then U.S. President Dwight D. Eisenhower realized it was important to be aware of any incoming missile or air attacks on North America. He called for the construction of a radar station network high above the Arctic Circle so that it would alert the government if the Soviets targeted the U.S. from the polar region. Known as the Distinct Early Warning or DEW line, the chain of 63 stations took a little more than 2 years to build. It stretched 3,000 miles across the 69th parallel from Alaska to Greenland. Most of the stations were in Canada. The DEW line operated for less than a decade before Soviet intercontinental ballistic missiles, or ICBMs, rendered the radar technology obsolete. Because designers only equipped the stations to detect aircraft and missiles traveling slower than the speed of sound, they were incapable of predicting an ICBM attack. The military decommissioned the stations and gave their 4 to 5 person crews merely an hour to evacuate. Some of the stations that were still in use were the DEW line's successor systems. During the mid-90s, there was a massive cleanup of the deserted stations, which had become open dumps full of debris. Only a few of the abandoned stations still exist today. 2 of them will soon disappear into the Greenland ice cap, which is thousands of feet thick. The Liz 2 station in Point Lay, Alaska is the only station that was preserved. They left the rest of the derelict properties to rot and are strewn with decaying buildings and rusting equipment. The snow has partially buried many of the structures, which has found its way into the building's interiors. Number 5. Port Lockroy. In the Palmer Archipelago west of Antarctica, an Antarctic expedition discovered the natural harbor of Port Lockroy in 1904 during the French Antarctic expedition. The explorers named it after the French politician Edouard Lockroy, who helped secure government funding for the project. From 1911 to 1930, fishermen used the harbor for whaling. Then, during World War II, the British embarked on a secret expedition to Antarctica known as Operation Tabarin and established a military base at Port Lockroy. Known simply as Station A, it operated as a research facility on Goudier Island until 1962. Scientists performed important work there, including the first measurements of the ionosphere and the first audio recording of magnetic waves known as an atmospheric whistler. In 1996, the British Antarctic Survey began renovating the old buildings, which include a museum and the world's most remote post office. Researchers study the site to learn more about the effects of tourism on penguins. It's one of the most popular Antarctic cruise ship destinations, with about 70,000 pieces of mail being processed at the post office during the 5-month visiting season every year. And if you've ever dreamed of visiting Antarctica, now might be your chance. Earlier this year, the UK Antarctic Heritage Trust announced that it's looking for people to run the post office, which has been closed since the pandemic. The station usually receives hundreds of applications for the 5-month tourist season, but has consistently faced understaffing issues for 2 years now. Ideal candidates are in good health and have some knowledge about living minimally, including without running water since there's none on the island. Would you work at Port Lockroy? Let me know in the comments below, but first, be sure to subscribe. Number 4. P38 Fighter planes. As the Nazis encroached on the United Kingdom in 1942, the United States rushed hundreds of warplanes to the British Isles to aid our ally in the war effort. But not all the aircraft reached their destination. In July of that year alone, 6 Lockheed P-38 fighter jets and 2 B-17 bombers made emergency landings in Greenland because of harsh weather. Rescue teams saved the crew members, but they left the 8 planes behind in an ice field. Over the following decades, they became buried in nearly 300 feet of snow. Members of the Greenland Expedition Society unearthed one plane nicknamed P-38 Glacier Girl in 1992 after years of searching and digging. They restored it to flying condition and took it to the skies in 2002 for the first time in 60 years. Shortly after P-38 Glacier Girl returned to the air, a pilot attempted to fly it on the original route across the Atlantic that it had failed to complete decades earlier. Unfortunately, he only made it to Labrador, Canada, where he had to land the aircraft because of a coolant leak. A search team returned to the ice field in Greenland in 2018 and found another P-38 nicknamed Echo. They announced plans to disassemble it and raise it piece by piece. The other 4 P-38s and the 2 B-17 bombers remain missing. Number 3. The Penguin. Traversing unforgiving polar terrain became a lot easier with the development of vehicles that were designed specifically for that purpose. But it took some trial and error, and one of the earliest designs proved horrendously flawed. Known as the Antarctic Snow Cruiser and nicknamed the Penguin, manufacturers designed the vehicle as a mobile base for the U.S. Antarctic Survey expedition. Manufacturing crews built it hastily over 11 weeks in 1939, and it malfunctioned repeatedly from the moment they completed it. During the 1,020-mile trip from Chicago to its departure port in Boston, the Penguin steering system was damaged, causing it to drive off a bridge in Ohio. It was stuck for 3 days before continuing along its journey. The vehicle's next stop was the Bay of Whales in Antarctica, where it immediately experienced problems upon its arrival. Its designers thought it was a good idea to equip the Penguin with tires that had no tread, which they designed for a swamp vehicle. It navigated poorly in the snow and ice, the tires spun freely whenever someone tried to drive them, and attaching chains to them did little to help, because the chains slipped around the treadless tires. Drivers discovered the Penguin operated better in reverse. It traveled backward for all 92 miles of its longest trek. Soon enough, the U.S. became entangled in World War II and the Antarctic expedition was abandoned, along with the Penguin. It was briefly spotted in 1958 below 23 feet of snow. The interior was exactly as it had been left, serving as a time capsule of the moment the crews had left and were called back to America. After that, the vehicle once again disappeared. It hasn't been seen since, leading researchers to believe that the snow and ice have reburied it, or it could have fallen into the Southern Ocean. Number 2. Pegasus Wreck. 2 pilots faced a tough decision on October 8, 1970, when the U.S. Navy C-21 Lockheed Constellation aircraft they were flying from New Zealand to Antarctica hit bad weather. They were already past the point of safe return and were running short on fuel, so turning around and flying back to New Zealand wasn't an option. The pair ultimately had no option but to fly through the horrendous weather and continue to McMurdo Station. With 80 people on board, it was a dangerous undertaking, but they had no other safe choices. The plane, nicknamed the Pegasus, soon encountered whiteouts and heavy winds that jostled it around so badly that parts broke off in midair. As the pilots circled the runway, they realized it was impossible to get a visual and that they'd have to land blindly. They landed safely outside the base on their second attempt, but the experience was quite unpleasant for everyone aboard. The plane descended rapidly, spun around, and skidded along the ground before finally coming to a stop. By then, its right wing and some of the landing gear had broken off. The emergency landing didn't seriously injure anybody, and everyone proceeded with their plans, leaving the aircraft abandoned at the crash site. The Pegasus still sits outside McMurdo today, where it's often partially covered in ice and snow. Number 1. Crashed cargo plane. While traveling from Washington State to Anchorage in 1952, a U.S. Air Force C-124 Globemaster cargo plane crashed into Alaska's Mount Gannett, killing all 52 souls aboard. It landed just miles off course. Air Force officials ruled that a navigational error resulting from poor instruments and bad weather caused the accident. The wreck was barely recognizable when search teams discovered it a week later. Only its tail remained intact, and all 52 passengers aboard had perished. The crash had triggered a major avalanche, encasing the downed aircraft in snow and ice. It became even more hidden over time because of glacial movement. Just a year after the tragedy, the plane had become buried in 50 feet of snow. Nobody saw it again until 2012, when an Army National Guard helicopter pilot spotted debris while flying overhead. At first, officials assumed it was a recent wreck that nobody had reported yet. But a ground search revealed the aircraft's true identity and age. In the 60 years since the crash, the plane had mysteriously traveled 13 miles from the original crash site. Every year during the 1 month that it's safe to travel to the site, a military volunteer crew goes there and recovers what they can. They've amassed a growing collection of artifacts, including dog tags, uniforms, wedding rings, wallets, and more. The team has also recovered the remains of all but 9 of the people who lost their lives in the wreck, and they hope to find more before the melting glacier sweeps the remaining items into the sea. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time for another amazing video right here on American Eye.